All right, so welcome everybody to this third webinar of the Exploring Planetary Justice series. In this third webinar, we explore planetary justice views on ecosocial justice in Central America, Mexico, and the Caribbean. Intersecting social and environmental challenges are affecting and endangering the human and non-human realms on Earth. This has intensified demands for justice, with some scholars proposing the concept of planetary justice. However, what exactly planetary justice means and whether this resonates with existing scholarship and practice of justice, especially in the ecosocial sense, is currently underexplored. This joint initiative between the Earth System Governance Project and the Center for Environmental Justice of Colorado State University aims at establishing an international network of researchers who are interested in exploring the place of planetary justice within their thinking and practice of ecosocial justice. For this reason, we are conducting this series of webinars across different world regions under this title, Exploring Planetary Justice. The panelists are invited to address three main prompts, drawing on their own research and experiences, while the moderator will synthesize the main lessons from this webinar at the end. We will collectively compare and synthesize lessons learned across all the webinars at the end of the webinar series. As I mentioned already, in this third webinar, we focus on Central America, Mexico, and the Caribbean. We have a wonderful panel. We are still trying to get one of our panelists in who is having some trouble with the internet, but we hope it will be resolved soon. But I will introduce you our moderator, which is Ignacio Rubio Caricuriborde. He's a professor at the Center for Sociological Studies of the School of Politics and Social Sciences at UNAM. And I will now give the floor to him to take over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Agni. I'm Ignacio Rubio. Thank you for the brief introduction and for the invitation to moderate this webinar. I'm very excited to hear the opinions and what my colleagues from Mexico, Chile, Puerto Rico have to say about this topic that you are proposing us to discuss. We're going to go very quickly because we're a little bit time tightened. So should I present the whole logistics? We're going to have individual interventions on three questions the Earth system is posing to us. Then we're going to go through those three questions, and then we will have a 30-minute discussion and a final wrap-up, which I hope will be very interesting. So I start right away. Let me first just name the panelists we're having this morning in Mexico. We have Sofia Avila, who is a researcher at the National University of Mexico. We have Gustavo Garcia, who is trying now to enter the webinar, and I hope he will be able to do it in short time. He is from Puerto Rico and has worked in various and different research projects and is engaged scholar. And we have also Gretel Navas, who is also from Chile, and she's assistant professor at the Department of Political Studies. And we have Celia Ruiz, who is a researcher in the CIMSUR of the National University in Mexico, in the frontier between Mexico and Guatemala. So the first question that we want to tackle is, what do you see as a major theoretical and political tendencies within ecological justice in your region? So we start with Sofia. Sofia.
Sorry, I was muted. Now can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes,
okay,
we can hear you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Ignacio, and thank you to the organizers, Agni, Dimitris, and Stefan, for inviting us to discuss these topics today. Okay, so sharing a little bit of what is happening in Mexico in terms of the major theoretical and political tendencies within ecosocial justice. I would have to say that, as a term, social justice is not very predominant. The most common term is social environmental justice, both for movements and theories across the country. And the discussions around social environmental justice are very much linked to environmental conflicts, what we know as social environmental conflicts, triggered by different types of development initiatives, infrastructures, mega projects, and so on. Most of conflicts mobilize the idea of indigenous territorial rights, the rights to self-determination, ecological protection as a means to defend traditional livelihoods, cultures, and the overall health of communities. I will talk a little bit more about peace and indigenous movements ahead, but for the moment, I would like to emphasize that most of these conflicts have surged after the NAFTA agreement, the free trade agreement with Mexico and the United States and Canada, the North America Trade Agreement, but other trade agreements as well that have been signed over the 19th and the first decades of the 21st century, because these agreements have enabled large corporations to make land purchases, open industrial agriculture and mining activities to investors and so on. Also, there is a notable focus of conflictive energy projects and more recently process of hyper-urbanization in certain geographies. So the links between globalization, neoliberal globalization, and environmental conflicts is very much addressed both for movements and theories around ecosocial justice, if you want. So basically, all these struggles are addressing the uneven political economy of neoliberal globalization, but also the uneven political ecology that comes with it. And there's also a very much an important emphasis on territorial dispossession, the concept of ecocide, and the critiques towards the abstract idea of development. If I have a little bit of more time, I have to say that we are changing. We are in a moment of change in terms of what type of government we have, and this government that is self-proclaimed a leftist government, a progressive government, is trying to challenge this neoliberal globalization project and the position that Mexico has in this political economy. And this is also shifting the type of conflicts and the type of conversations that we have around ecosocial justice. But perhaps for that point, I will take the next question to unpack a little bit more.
Right. Thank you very much. So we move on to Gustavo. Hello, Gustavo. Nice to see you, to meet you. I don't know if you heard the first questions I already made. So the first question we have to answer is, what do you see as a major theoretical and political tendencies within ecosocial justice in your region? So that's it. Let's see.
The major theoretical and political tendencies. Coming from the movement, I imagine, no, is the question, not from the mainstream, or are we discussing both simultaneously?
I think we should go for both because it's kind of a regional,
Thank you.
So
yes,
introduce the terrain.
Thank you. The terrain, yeah, the terrain of struggle. Yeah, so I'm coming from Puerto Rico. I've been somewhat of a privileged climate refugee for the last 5 years, displaced by Hurricane Maria. and I'm now living in Portugal. So I'm speaking now with that positionality of also engaging here with the terrain of struggle here. But let me just focus for a minute on Puerto Rico, which is always in my heart. I think what we have now is the more blatant, open, unapologetic form of colonialism happening in Puerto Rico since at least 2016, 2017, with the imposition of the Fiscal Control Board, or the Junta, which is a board installed by the U.S. Congress during the Obama presidency to manage our finances and analyze and approve all our policies that are made by the local legislature and the local government. And to make sure that we pay off our debt to U.S. investors and mainly speculative funds. And so we see very clearly the coloniality of debt in the case of Puerto Rico, and how debt is used not just in Puerto Rico. This is a global phenomenon now that it has been discussed and contested for decades now, how debt has been used in the post-colonial period as a tool of control and continuing colonization and continuing extractivism in the global South by imperial powers. And so in Puerto Rico, we see that very exposed, in a legal way, in a very legal way, in a very and so Puerto Rico has been a colony of the U.S. since 1898, and so the veneer of some kind of self-government was destroyed in that period of 2016, and since then also Hurricane Maria was also breaking this veneer that we were cared for by the U.S., that we were developed beyond the Latin American standards by the U.S. Colonization or support or Commonwealth. And so this has opened space for new political movements to emerge, for building on long legacies of environmental justice activism that existed for decades. And so these movements, I think, have become stronger in the sense that they were able to link more clearly the critiques that they've been making to development and to extractivism with the critique to the colonial system, with the critique of the debt system, and the way that the governments have responded to disasters in a disaster capitalist way, and so all of these coming together have, let's say, united a lot of environmental justice activists with anti-debt or debt justice activists, with just recovery activists and housing rights activists. And in 2019, all of these movements, also with feminist activists, with anti-racist activists, all of these movements came together in 2019 to kick out the governor at the time after a scandal on a chat, and that's it. That's kind of more or less the...
Great, thank you very much.
Great.
Sorry, I'm going to be a little bit touchy on the time because we're supposed to go through three.
I understand. Thank you.
So great. It was. Thank you very much. So now we move on to Gretel. Just a brief presentation.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Good. Well, first, thank you very much for having me today. As a clarifying point, I am based in Chile, but I am from Costa Rica. And most of my research has been done in Central America. So I will talk from there, from Central America, which is a small region in terms of territory and population compared to Mexico, for instance, but it is extremely heterogeneous region in terms of political regimes, violence against environmental defenders, promotion of environmental policy, environmental diplomacy, among others. 7 countries with different also histories of war, violence, and democracy. So to talk from Central America is kind of tricky because, as I said, it's like we should unpack these all elements that we have in the region. But one main, well, to respond to the question, one main theoretical tendency within ecosocial justice, broadly speaking, because I agree with Sophia that the term is not well established in the region, or not at least theoretically. But one related concept or theoretical claim we are using that can dialogue with ecosocial justice is the frame of political ecology, a framework that understands the link among nature and environment from a political perspective, trying to understand, as Sophia said, the power asymmetries, social inequalities, also the capital accumulation from extractivist projects, especially mining and hydroelectric dams in the case of Central America, and of course, monocultures, agribusiness. And political ecology also allows to understand this relationship between the local communities, their struggles, and the global forces that are pushing them to criticize or to go beyond this extractivist project that is taking place in Central America. So from there, I see political ecology as a theoretical frame has a lot to offer, or the discussions we have in Central America has a lot to offer to this big frame of ecosocial justice. And I will reduce a little bit more, and not only political ecology as it's been used in England or in France or in Europe or in the US, but the Latin American political ecology, which has been also mobilized by feminist scholars in the region in particular. I am talking about Lorena Cabnal, for instance, in Guatemala, and other colleagues that have been on trying to understand this relation among nature and I mean social nature relationship from a feminist perspective. So I will say that the Latin American political ecology and feminist Latin American political ecology would be true frames in that regard. And as a political tendency, I think there are very interesting regional initiatives mobilized in the beginning by Costa Rica and Chile, but Costa Rica is not anymore in the boat. And I am talking about the regional agreement on access to information, public participation, and justice in environmental matters in Latin America and the Caribbean, better known as the Escazú Agreement. So I think this agreement, it's also like one political tendency that could allow us to pragmatize the concept of ecosocial justice in more like specific way, with laws, with policies, with the role of the state in guarantee public participation and justice in environmental matters. And well, actually the conference of the parties is taking place now in Santiago. And I think, as I said before, that the implementation of this agreement will lead to a more and better environmental legislation in environmental and human rights matters in the countries, of course, that are endorsing the agreement. And yes, I would lead it from here because I can start talking also from South America, but I already know that you had the panel. But just to say that it's another political tendency that I think is interesting, but is not gaining space in Central America yet. And it's all this pushing for the rights of Mother Earth in the constitutions. So I think it's also interesting to see why in Central America, I mean, the debate is there, but not at a political level. And yes, that's from my side.
Great. Thank you. You're all making me take a lot of notes then. I hope 5 minutes at the end are going to be enough. Anyway, we go now to Celia. Please. Hello, Celia. Nice to see
hello,
you.
Nacho. Nice to see you. Thank you very much for the organizers to organize this event. And well, my colleagues have said most of the important trends in the region. So I'm just going to complement very briefly some ideas from the context of Chiapas. A lot in common with the ideas you just said. In Chiapas, I think the most important trend is that ecosocial justice is deeply intertwined with historical and ongoing struggles against colonization, colonialism, and neocolonialization, and the fight for land. So yeah, in our region, because of this historical trend, we draw heavily and as you just say, guys, political ecology, and particularly Latin America political ecology, in an attempt to confront global political economies and forms of territorialization that excludes territories, people, and non-human beings. I think this is the most noticeable trend here in Chiapas. But in general, research they try to challenge these dominant frameworks of environmental management and climate governance, because these frameworks or these models so often overlook the realities of Chiapas and the global South in general. And sometimes, and so often, they offer solutions that can reinforce and often so, sorry, I'm just having some problems with the internet. I'm not quite sure if you are listening to me, but I keep talking. So yeah, okay. So in response to this situation, I think there is a rich literature here in the Global South, produced here in the Global South, that conceptualizes and constructs notions of justice at very different scales, and that takes into account this in Chiapas and Mexico and in South America. So yeah, these justice notions are in dialogue with social environmental movements, feminist thinkers, and anti-capitalist activists, as we just listened to Gustavo and my colleagues. So all of these lead us to advocates for policies and initiatives that tries to recognize and respect local rights and knowledges, and to resist nature, particularly this trend of commodification of nature, which is so strong in global political economy and global political environmental policies. So I'm just going to finish with this idea that we stress the importance of thinking globally and acting locally, this common phrase, but also we stress the idea of thinking locally and acting globally. That would be all from my side.
Great. Thank you, Celia, for this interesting participation. So I understand we should first go through the 3 questions they are proposing. So, and then we will have a space for sharing or general comments. So very quickly, I will move to the second question, and we're going to change now the order of the comments, of the short introductory comments you're providing us with. The second question is, what are the forces for or against ecosocial justice in your region, in addition to the global or planetary levels? I think some of it has been already mentioned, but we can, a little bit get deeper into the forces for or against. So we start now with Gustavo, to your first ideas on this.
Yeah, thank you. Just to continue, because I think I was starting with this, just to say that one of the main issues today in relation to environmental justice, just transitions, ecosocial justice is really energy and food are 2 main terrains of struggle in Puerto Rico. I think this, not just in Puerto Rico, but particularly from what and the theoretical developments and the political arguments developed, which we can call them political ecology, Latin American political ecology, I would argue come mainly from the movement and from the communities in struggle, with some academics allied with those movements developing, and there's a whole trajectory of action research or militant research coming from organizations based on in these communities, working with these communities that have developed their own theorization of environmental justice in Puerto Rico and as has been the case also across Latin America. And so the analysis of the forces comes from that understanding of that groundedness, the territorially grounded condition of these struggles and these theorizations. And I would say that in Puerto Rico, the forces, as I said, the main forces against which we are fighting is colonialism and coloniality, you know, and this is manifested in the debt, is manifested in the extreme austerity, in the normalization of all of these things as inevitable conditions of government, you know, and the deepening of inequalities that come with this, and the deepening of extractivism. So, for instance, now we have all these large-scale industrial solar farms that are being developed as a response to the hurricane disaster, saying, you know, we need renewable energy, but what kind? But these solar farms are being developed in prime agricultural lands. Against and not to provide electricity to the communities that are neighboring these farms, these lands, but rather to provide for the city centers. And we also have all these speculative investments in luxury tourism and luxury residences that are associated to this coloniality of particularly in the post-Maria period. We have deep entrenched corruption that is mainly enabled precisely by the U.S. government as part of its control, political and economic control of Puerto Rico, and we have of course all the racist and patriarchal and social structures that legitimize, you know, these. So the forces in that sense are perhaps not different, not so much different from the past. Now we can put the additional force of the climate crisis, which is also a colonial crisis. No, it's also the product of all of this colonial model of historical development. And the Caribbean is one of the regions that has been most impacted, though. A competition of who is most impacted seems irrelevant at this point, because everywhere we are seeing devastation, no, from the climate crisis. But the mega hurricanes are, of course, something that is particularly affecting basic things such as energy. We spent more than 3 months in the city center of the capital in San Juan without energy after Maria, and this was just the first Category 5 hurricane, and we will face many more. The food shortages, the fuel shortages, the basic elements of everyday life will be continually threatened, increasingly threatened by hurricanes, you know, because the agricultural devastation, for instance, that comes with these hurricanes. And there, for instance, agroecology is a particularly important force, because we saw after the hurricane not just that agroecological farms were more resilient to the disaster, but actually socially they were more resilient, not just ecologically, but socially, because you had all these solidarity brigades that are part of the agroecological movement historically that came together. You had mutual aid activists that came together to work in the farms, to cook together, to rebuild the social and ecological infrastructure of the communities. And so that's more or less where mutual aid is one of the counter-hegemonic forces that I see most potent at this moment, no? Through self-management grounded in these historical struggles for environmental and social justice.
Thank you, Gustavo. Very interesting. So now we move to Gretel about the forces against or for environmental justice.
The broad question, but thank you very much for the question. I think I focus my answer on the forces against, but I agree with Gustavo with the forces for. But some weeks ago, we published a letter to call attention on the situation in Nicaragua. For those who haven't followed, the government of Nicaragua has approved a law which expands mining activities in natural reserves and traditional communities' lands. So this new law has increased environmental conflicts in the region, in the country, but also violence against those who protest the law and the extractivist projects. So one main force against ecosocial justice, I would say, is the violence against environmental defenders and overall violence against civil society who mobilize for environmental justice and ecosocial justice. So, well, we all know violence against environmental defenders is not happening only in Nicaragua. It is a common pattern all around the world, particularly in the global south, in different levels, of course. However, the situation in Central America is very serious. Data from the Global Witness, which is this British, no, England, I don't know, remember, an NGO in England, based in London, that counts the murders of environmental defenders every year, have concluded in many of the reports that Honduras and Nicaragua are per capita the deadliest places on earth for environmental defenders. So I think that should call the attention from all of us in terms of course, not in quantity of murders, but in per capita, the situation is very serious. So I think before talking about environmental issues, should be a big debate on human rights I mean, speaking from Central America, because of the levels of direct violence that are taking place there. And in countries that sometimes we don't have data, which is the case of Nicaragua, because of course this is reported by different organizations, but in the case of Nicaragua, access to information is getting difficult every day. So that one forces against, I would say, violence against environmental defenders. And another point I think I should highlight, and I think as academics, we don't know a lot. It's the relation among illegal activities and environmental degradation. And here I am pointing on how drug trafficking, for instance, and drug trafficking organizations launder money into extractive economies, such as oil palm plantations, mining activities, and these organizations seek to control territories along all the supply chain of the drug trafficking. So this is posing also another type of conflicting, another type of conflict that we have, I think, I mean, that I think we don't have enough information, but it's gaining terrain in the region, and in particular in Central America, because of course we are the path from Colombia to Mexico. So, of course, the dynamic in the region is very serious. So I think we should also pay more attention in this regard. And I agree with Gustavo that forces for agroecology, many, yes, and all the resistance and the creation of alternatives that are taking place from the territories at a more local level.
Okay, thank you. Very important things. And then we move to Celia.
Yeah, thank you, Metro. Well, in Chiapas, I'm going to try to be a little bit optimistic in spite of the serious situation we are living right now in terms of violence. But we can say that the landscape of ecosocial justice, yes, is marked by both these profound challenges that are both local and global. As Gretel just said, we are facing a reality of marked by a diversity of forms of violence, a narco governance de facto in many territories where the state is absent, poverty, corruption, and marginalization, and the disruption on everyday life and social relations, and of course, Grete was pointing out the violence against social and environmental movements. This is a reality in Chiapas as well as in the rest of the global south. On the side of hope, I would like to stress that still there is a strong community ties here in Chiapas, in the communities of Chiapas, and there is a spirit of resistance that's been here for a long time. It's part of the history of these territories for many, many generations. It's fair to say, and I would like to stress that indigenous groups and local campesino farmers are the key players right now, and as well as in the past, are the ones who are standing firm for the rights of land and for a life of dignity, and are the ones who are creating and joining social movements for collective actions, and are the ones right now, the only ones who are facing the brutality of narco gangs in many territories in Chiapas, particularly in the borderlands with Guatemala. Campesinos are the only ones even getting armed themselves to fight against the narco violence, because the narco governance it touches everything, as Gretel says. It's undermining the rule of law, is co-opting the very institutions that are supposed to protect the people and the land, is breaking the social fabric, is confronting neighborhoods, is confronting communities, is devastating the territory. So how, in terms of dialogue, or in terms of justice, how are you going to deal with these agents that are taking control of a huge part of the territory? It's a question we need to ask. And yes, of course, external pressures are also very important in these territories, and they drive social environmental degradation, they create tensions, and they create environmental conflicts. And as my colleagues just said, that would be enough for me. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's move quickly to Sofia.
Okay, well, I fully agree and endorse what my colleagues have described. Perhaps I will add to those points. I think in Mexico, the main forces against ecosocial justice are both neocolonialism, but also what a Mexican scholar, Pablo González Casanova, defined as internal colonialism. So these are processes of permanent colonialism, so to say. So neocolonialism, we are experiencing it, as I was mentioning, as a subordinated role of the country in the global neoliberal economy. As Gustavo say, external debt has played a key role in keeping Latin American economies, global South economies in general, in a subordinated position where the countries have to go to the reprimarization, to exploit natural resources, to provide cheap nature, but also cheap labor to the centers of the capitalist economy. And I have to say that in this point, because we have been experiencing these processes for decades now, but the new thing about this is it's the green label that we are observing in the context of the climate crisis and the energy crisis and the peak oil and all of these things that are happening right now. And what we are having here in Mexico is these tensions between the imperial green project of the United States and Europe, and the project that has also China to get the resources for its great economic project that they have. So basically, this is re-editing neocolonial relationships in terms of mining activities, purchases of land for renewable energy projects, and also the narratives of ecotourism and so on. So I think this is an important point that we have to address more in depth. There is indeed a discussion in the Latin American region where Mexico participates, and it's the Ecosocial Pact that has been discussing since the pandemic what is the role of Latin America and the Caribbean in the context of Green New Deal conversations in the global north. What is our position? What type of dialogues we have to not reproduce these colonial and extractivist relations. But also internal colonialism is a very important aspect of this because, as I was mentioning, we are now governed by a self-proclaimed left administration that is also pushing for this type of developing projects that are commanded by the state and the military. Not only the state, the public utilities, but also it's controlled by the military. The Tren Maya in the peninsula of Yucatan, and other big projects in the isthmus of Tehuantepec connecting the two oceans. So we are seeing that also the state is leading to this process of colonialism. And okay, I won't go further with the violence because I think both Gretel and Celia mentioned it very well. Just to say that these criminal organizations are part of the capitalist logic of accumulation and exploitation through violence, explicit violence and very open violence. But I would say that the main force in favor of ecosocial justice is, as also they were mentioning, I think the revolutionary tradition of peasant communities, indigenous communities, campesino communities in Mexico. We have this tradition that comes from the struggles of the beginning of the 20th century that led to the Zapatista movement when the NAFTA was being signed. And this is more or less the torch that we're having. No, I don't want to romanticize indigenous movements and indigenous communities because we know that there are also internal struggles, mainly from women in these communities. But I also would like to emphasize that this idea that these traditions of what it's called comunalidad, it's the process of making commons in the everyday life, and also in the institutions of managing the land and managing resources locally. So I would say that the main force in favor of ecosocial justice is to protect the communal institutions and the tradition of the revolution of the peasant communities in Mexico, but also in introducing other actors such as workers, such as women, such as the youth, and so on.
Thank you, Sofia. Well, we still have 40 minutes go, so we still have a third question that I think you all have already, taken on your answers. So I will ask you to be very kind of short and say, well, do you think that the ecosocial justice narratives in general are taking hold in Latin America, or, as I kind of note, are losing actually weight in the face of colonialism and this connection between environmental justice and all the things that you already talked about? So I would ask you to be really short on this so we can move to the questions of the people that are listening to us. And now we're going to change again the order, and we're going to start with Celia, please. Very short.
And before
comment.
we start, I'm sorry to intervene. We are also interested in the planetary justice as well. So if you find any, if this concept has also made its way in your thinking and region. Thank you.
Let's go for it, Celia.
Okay. Well, before this webinar, I wasn't familiar with the term of planetary justice, to be honest. But after exploring it for this discussion, I can see opportunities for theoretical and methodological enrichment. But first, I would like to emphasize a key element that is absent in many of the justice conceptualization, and that is the religious fact, which is so important. Religion territories in Chiapas, and is a force for a social order, and is a force to set who is claiming justice and what is justice and how justice is conceptualized. So what I've been observing during my field work is that some religious faiths, and Chiapas is a territory with a huge diversity in religions and faiths. So some of them have a strong influence on how justice and eco-justice is understood. And some of them foster notions, as we've seen, for example, with the liberation theology, that they conceive and they have this concept of the planet as our common home, as a sacred space to be cherished and protected. But other faiths, on the contrary, can inspire apocalyptic narratives, fanaticism, exclusion, and enable regressive patriarchal views. I've seen in the course of my field work, I've seen how some religious faiths are labeling anything which is different as a diabolic. And for example, shamanistic beliefs, non-binary sexual orientations, and even the defense of land and nature has been labeled as something diabolic. So I think it's important. I think it's essential to understand how these diverse religious sentiments can align with ecosocial justice, to foster liberation and community and communality, as Sophia was saying. So now, for me, planetary justice, after a little bit of reflection, not much, I would say that to me means to recognize that the responsibility for climate crisis is not shared equally. Although we all inhabit this planet, the environmental crisis has been disproportionately created or caused by the actions of a few, particularly global elites. So our task, I think our challenge is to envision alternatives and to live in this planet and to create dialogues to bridge cultural and general divides. And finally, I think it's so important if we are going to think in this planetary justice to broaden our justice perceptions to include a diversity of concepts and worldviews at the planetary level. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we go to Sophia now.
Yes, well, I very much agree with what Celia was saying. I am also not very familiar with the term. I think I have read it in some articles, but I would say it's an interesting entry, but with caution. There's a very common debate in environmental justice movements and scholars in terms of who is defining what justice means and what are the implications for the subjects of injustice, the way that justice is defined and proceeded in different institutional instruments. And recently I read a very interesting article from a Turkish scholar named Özge Yaka, and she states that justice, in front of these liberal notions of justice that are very much dominant in the Western world, she's proposing and drawing on different political philosophers the idea of justice as a permanent invention. Justice is defined by the context where injustices are taking place. We have to address what type of political economy, political ecology is taking place in the place of injustices, and who are the subjects of injustice. And it's the subjects of injustice defining what justice means for them. I know this is difficult in terms of operational level, so to say, but we have to reimagine the way we seek for justice at different scales. Of course, planetary justice puts the scales on the table because we're talking about the planet, we're talking about the global, the regional, the national, then the local, and so on. I would say that following Celia, the interesting entry to build a critical perspective on planetary justice would be to draw on critical discussions on climate justice. I personally agree or endorse and support and think about the most radical proposals of climate justice, where international solidarity is geared towards dismantling capitalism and its ever expanding metabolism that it's pushing for, exploiting nature and exploiting labor in uneven ways at the global level. And I think an interesting conversation there has to be with the dialogues between degrowth, post-growth in the global north, post-development, buen vivir alternatives in the global south. But of course, I want to say that these ideas of global north and global south sometimes are very rigid, and they create like very rigid blocks. So I prefer also to talk about the centers and the peripheries of the system, because these allow us to think about what are the peripheries also in the global north, to build solidarities from there, to think about climate justice from the peripheries of this system that it's constantly exploiting nature and society. So my view on planetary justice would be, I mean, if I may, to enrich this idea of planetary justice, would be from these entries. And I will close it here because I see that I already passed the time.
Thank you. No, very interesting. Gustavo, please.
Yes, thank you. Very interesting, this idea of justice from the different positionalities of those, let's say, in the front lines, or those affected, those vulnerable, most vulnerable. I think that this maybe what Celia was saying about the global, no, and this helps us think about planetary justice, in the sense that in Puerto Rico, of course, there is a realization that we are embedded in a global system that is, and this is manifested not only in the relationship with the U.S. and how the U.S. empire is global. So this has always been a thing in the, let's say, in the political debate, at least from the left and from environmental justice, has been always how our struggle is linked to the struggles elsewhere in the U.S. and in the other colonies of the U.S. So this has always been part of, and actually Puerto Ricans were key in the first People of Color Environmental Justice Summit in 1991, and to bring issues of colonialism together with Native Americans and with other people from other colonies, from Hawaii, and so there has always been that, even if the alliances have been difficult to build. I think during the struggle against the U.S. Navy in the island of Vieques, that struggled for against the bombings of the U.S. Navy in that island, and for the exit of the Navy from there, and the closure of the military base there. There was a moment of building transnational planetary justice alliances that was very important, even with allies from anti-military movements in Japan, for instance, fighting against U.S. military bases. And so that global dimension comes and goes. I think climate change is another moment where the global dimension of planetary justice, the planetary dimension of justice has come to Puerto Rico, in the realization that, making alliances with other islands, for instance, other island nations. There was an encounter a few years ago of island nations from all over the world coming together in Puerto Rico to discuss how to build alliances to confront the climate crisis, which is affecting island nations in particular ways. No. I think there is always a barrier with the U.S. With the Puerto Rico, because of the colonization by the U.S. There's always a tendency to look only to the U.S. and mainly to the U.S. as well. So that limits also our involvement in the Caribbean, for instance, and I would say more generally in the Latin American and Caribbean region, because of those kind of political and human relations. We have a lot of migration to the U.S., and so that kind of conditions how we look at the world always through the U.S. as a I don't know how to say, but maybe you understand. It's a shade or something like that. And so I think that the climate change has also brought Puerto Ricans into the COP, into the negotiation spaces, and to make alliances there with other peoples, and to see how these climate negotiations are not taking into account at all the conditions of colonies, and also of island nations in particular, who have very little voice in these spaces. And I think I will leave it there, and we can discuss more. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting. Finally, we end up with Gretel again.
Thank you, Ignacio. Yes, as Celia, I have to say the first time I read the concept planetary justice was when Dimitri sent me the invitation for this event. So, and as far as I know, it's not a concept that is being used in Central America academically or politically. But of course, when I was reading, because I read a little bit before the session about what does it mean or what is being constructed behind the concept. Of course, the concept resonates a lot with other concepts such as, I have it here, environmental justice or critical environmental justice, also planetary health, climate justice, global justice, and many others that my colleagues have already mentioned. And what it means to me, so just to say that there are opportunities to link and to conceptualize this concept. It's not that it's not being used, it's not used as a concept, but of course, when we read about what it means, there is a discussion there with different other concepts, let's say. So what it means to me, as it is as the concept say, planetary justice, for me, what I understand is like to guarantee justice at a planetary scale, but justice also beyond an anthropocentric point of view. And I think this is important, no? This link, the debate that I said before, the debate that it's gaining terrain in South America on how the rights of Mother Earth in the political constitutions. Of course, some countries have been more successful than others, like in Chile, that did not gain a lot of terrain in the project. But I think the risk behind this concept, as Sophia said, is what does justice mean first? And I see another risk in trying to englobe issues of justice at a planetary scale. My first question is how to pragmatize it at different scales of analysis. I mean, how to think this planetary justice from the bottom up rather than the top down first. But also, this is also when I was reading the documents, my question was, yes, how to pragmatize it in a different scales, and most importantly, what institutions we have or what institutions should be created and where to guarantee this planetary justice. And I think I would be very interested to see your comments on that, no? Because we can stay at the philosophical perspective, but at the end, which is the path to guarantee it? I think institutions are needed. Rather state institutions, social institutions, institutions from the commons, but we have to think about who will and where this planetary justice will be guaranteed.
Okay, that was great. I think we have a lot of materials, and now we should, according to the logistics, we should move to a general discussion. And to answer the people that is hearing us, the questions or comments, or read the comments, should I read the comments or that we have here in the chat?
Ignacio,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but it's my task to read you the questions from the...
Oh, fantastic.
So yeah, I have been sifting through the comments, and there's a lot of comments and statements that you can't really phrase as a question. So I'll do the questions that I found. So the first one is from Paula Malk, and she asks is there a similar movement or scholarship on political ecology on the African continent, in particular feminist contributions? What would be the main similarities and differences? Thanks. This is a tricky one, but if you know anything about that, that might be worth discussing. And then the next question is from Jorge Garcia Arias from the University of León in Spain. Could any of you comment in more depth on the relationships that exists in your regions between the ideas and practices of ecosocial justice, socioeconomic and ecological transitions, decoloniality and pluriverse, and also more broadly, your vision of what these connections should be between the different territories of the global south, especially on the idea of the pluriverse. And then finally, could the pluriverse be a way to connect with the idea of planetary justice? So that was from Jorge Garcia Arias. And then the final question is from Paula Munoz. And how can we do restorative justice in hostile regions where the governments do not support the protection of the environment and even exacerbate the environmental injustices? So yeah, tricky questions. And over to you again, Ignacio, to see what you can do with those.
I think now we have a kind of panel discussion, an open panel discussion. So I would say that the first two questions have to do with the scales and the nexus between regions, and I think that's something that our guests have talked about. In particular, I think the one in Africa is a tricky one because there's a lot of exchange between that. So I don't. Okay, I don't know who wants to jump into that to answer the first one about regional connections and the way political ecology and these concepts are being used outside, or the dialogues Latin America and the Caribbean is having with other regions, which I think can be very rich. I don't know, Gustavo or Sofia. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was thinking that, I mean, I don't have a straightforward, super concrete answer, but I was thinking that something that it has been interesting over the last years is that discussions on political ecology and militant research that started in Europe are now going outside Europe and creating larger networks of exchange, of political and theoretical exchange. So if I remember well, it was a few years back that the Conference of Political Ecology took place in South Africa. And this year is taking place in Lima, in Peru, and at the same time it's taking place in Sweden. And if I'm not wrong, in
Tanzania and Dodoma.
Tanzania. So I think this is an interesting initiative to decentralize also the spaces and the people that is participating in political and activist research exchanges in the political ecology arena, which is very much related with ecosocial justice and so on. So I think that's an interesting point of discussion. I would suggest to the person that was asking this question to also follow this ecosocial pact, but because I believe that there might be some dialogues, South-South dialogues with Africa and South Asia. And there's also this pluriverse book that gathers scholars mainly from the global south, but also from Europe and the United States, critical scholars that are discussing this idea of how to enable a world where different worlds coexist. This is like a premise of the Zapatista movement that is now gaining force in this idea of what could a global planetary justice could look like. So the pluriverse book, I think it's open access and I think it's available in internet.
I don't know, Gustavo, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I think that I am actually now starting to supervise a PhD thesis from a colleague from Mozambique, who is wanting to develop an ecofeminist political ecology from Mozambique and more generally from Africa. And one of the things we've been discussing is that there is very little written, at least in the Anglophone literature that I know, on an African political ecology. Definitely not to the extent of the Latin American political ecology tradition. That is not to say that there are amazing thinkers and activists on environmental and ecosocial justice and ecofeminist and other radical climate justice approaches. From Africa, I know in South Africa, for instance, there is a group called CAPE, and they've developed a charter on climate justice, and they've been doing an assembly process, and they've been linking climate justice and food sovereignty movements and initiatives, and they've developed their own theorization of climate justice. And of course, Asian and African activists were crucial in the development of the concept of climate justice itself. That emerged in a declaration in 2002, and I believe it was in Durban, that declaration, or if not, it was definitely moved by global justice activists, mainly from those regions. And so I think that that there is definitely a tradition there that should be looked at more closely. The connections with Latin American scholars and activists, I think, is emergent and is something to develop definitely more strongly. I was recently in London in a Just Transitions gathering organized by Warren Want, which is a global justice organization from the UK, based in the UK, but with a lot of people from different parts of the world. And I could see there are these different spaces, no? And you know, Nimo Bassi was there, an amazing scholar and activist on environmental justice, and other people. Takshim, I don't remember her name, but the leader of Climate Action Network, Tashim. Anyways, different people that you could see that was a different space from the Latin American space, that we all knew each other, and then there was the African and Asian activists that all knew each other, and there is definitely there's something to build a bridge on. And we were there to build those bridges, but we also saw how challenging it was to do so. And we come with different traditions, different languages, different struggles, and so that is definitely requiring more space of dialogue, more space of encounter.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think Celia wants to say something.
Yes, I just want to add a little reflection, listening to you, to my colleagues, and it has to do with this idea of the differences between Latin American political ecology or Anglo-Saxon Latin American ecology, and I think one of the maybe main differences is that Latin American ecology and making reflections and talking straight or directly with the issues or the conflicts or the environmental, socio-environmental conflicts that we are living in front of us, we are dealing with them. They are just part of our everyday life experience. It's not something far away. It's not something that we can't see. We deal with that, and it's part of our cities. It's part of our daily experience. Most in Chiapas, where I'm living. Having said that, I think it's important to have a conversation regarding these binary oppositions between the North and South, and breaking this idea that we cannot talk, or that there is no space for dialogue between what is produced in the North or what is produced in the South. I think it's so important to have this conversation because there is, as I said before, there is a literature here cannot and have the reach to add it to the conversation, and also to make links with these alternative views in the North or peripheral thoughts in the North. But to me, maybe I'm wrong, but to me there is space to have a dialogue that breaks these binary oppositions. Most of us, we are working in the South, but we've been studying in the North. And most of us, we can read the literature produced in that is produced in the North. And sometimes these oppositions are not or these opposing views from the Latin American political ecology or political ecology produced in the North. I don't think they are. We need to talk about that. Is what I want to say. We need to open this conversation clearly without censorship, and that would be the point that I want to stress.
Yeah, well, I think that also we have to talk about networks, isn't it? I mean, just not, space or regions like that, as you say, Celia, but we're talking about networks and academic networks and social movement networks, and that those networks connect and also have resources. That's the main point. And I think from Latin America, from feeding this dialogue we're trying to have, these resources are important. But now I would go to Gretel. I don't know if Gretel has something to say about this, about the general things. And just a quick thing. Also, there's an interesting question about the relationship between generations, and is not only feminism, but also about generations, and in the context of countries with so much migration, I'm sure that is important.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think spaces of encounter between Latin America and Africa are needed. From our group of the Latin American Political Ecology group from Claxo, we are trying, well, Sofia is part and Gustavo are also part from this group, so they know. We have this conversation in our General Assembly in how to engage more as academics, more with scholars from Africa, because we often cite only Latin Americans, or we cite the people from the global north, from Europe or the US, but we have this. We have had this conversation how to engage more theoretically with the debates that are taking place in Africa. And I have to say that one main issue we have faced is this colonial legacy, because that is the language, no? Because we have publications here are written mostly in Spanish, and in Africa mostly in French. So I think we should make efforts to pass through these limitations. And I have to say that not only from Africa, we have it also in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have great scholars from Martinique, Guadeloupe, and French or English-speaking islands that we are not engaging with them. So we see these fractures, colonial fractures in our own region. And so also to keep talking about why we have those limitations and why we are separated. They have, of course, a structural and historical legacy that are the colonial part. So, and I share in the chat the El Pacto Social del Sur that Sofia mentioned. I'm also going to share another network that I am part. The name is Casas. And these are only scholars from the Global South, but mostly on agrarian justice and climate justice. So you want to have a look. This is another network of scholars, African, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, that we are also thinking about land grabbing, energy transition, agrarian justice, and from the South and for the South. Just that regarding that question.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, there was another focus question, particular. I can't remember the second one. It was 3 questions that you posed at the beginning. Can you remind me that one?
Yeah, the third question was, how can we do restorative justice in hostile regions where the governments do not support the protection of the environment and even exacerbate the environmental injustices?
There was one about the pluriverse before also, no? Or did we address that together?
Yeah, there was a longer one about the
pluriverse. That was the second one.
Okay, so does anybody want to jump in? About coastal justice. I don't know. Celia is working now with Blue Justice and has been working with fisheries.
Yes, Nacho. Sorry, I'm just struggling with the internet. It's all the time getting me out of the platform. Yeah, I didn't listen very well the question. You said just now blue justice. Oh,
Yes, I was saying the question was about how to, support or tackle the thing of coastal. Yes, I
okay,
understood.
all right. Yeah,
Yeah, in
okay.
countries where governments are not supporting, actually
Mm.
environmental measures or policies.
Uh, well, I would say that I'm working right now with this concept, blue justice, and it's the same as climate justice or environmental justice. It's a concept that came out of social movements, and now it's jumping to the academia, and again, it's a concept that needs to be to rethink a little bit how we understand the justice in terms of um, marine environment. We are talking of an environment that is terrestrial environment. We most of the time is fluid. It's a fluid nature. We can see most of the time what are the resources in the sea, but we can see the effects that political economy and environmental governance, green or blue colonialism is taking in the coastal areas. I'm just coming from Costa Rica, actually, where I've been studying this situation in terms of how these political economies and green and blue colonialism is and how this is connected with just we've been comment on that, with these capitalist and neoliberal policies and that has global, local, regional influences, and how the governments are aligned with these new economic models, new green models, new green deal or blue deal proposals that are trying to wide out the territorializing or different ways to connect with coastal environments or territorial environments. This is what I can say. I'm not quite sure if I'm responding to the answer, but yeah, I will leave it here.
Yeah, well, I also believe there's a clear divide, not only in between North and South and those kind of things that are very DC, but within the same academia. I mean, I just want to say that here, political ecologists, sociologists, anthropologists, and that thing. But in Latin America, if we go, at least in Mexico, if we go, for example, into the geographical institutes, the Institute of Climate Change, we will find a completely different perspective from our colleagues in Latin America. And they are working mostly on, governance, environmental governance and environmental management. So I would never, take our vision as the standard vision of the region. I think that probably planetary justice as a concept is being worked or has more potential within the natural sciences and or in engineering or whatever you say that in that area. So what I think is important here in this group that we kind of share a common interest in the topic, but a common connection with the movements in our particular fields of work. So I think we have 5 minutes left, and it's time for me to make a little wrap up. I don't know if that's correct. If you're expecting something more or more exchange, just let me know. I'm just
Ignacio, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm just like that, trying to jump in since the beginning. No, thank you very much again. I just make some notes and things. First of all, I would say that all our colleagues mentioned colonialism and extractivism and political ecology as a framework, which is very strong in Latin America. Latin American political ecology, I would agree with that, with that name. But I would also be careful that the critical to colonialism, for example, as Sofia said, is not new in Latin America, but it's just, you know, like getting connected with the broader colonialism critique that is being developed mainly in Europe, as we know it. And I think that and that's also true, that can be said as true for the whole environmental topic. But in Latin America, we have a deep, you know, tradition of debates about peasants, about the relationship between cities and rural areas, about internal colonialism. And so what we see is that, or as I see it, and as I feel it after what my colleagues have said, is that the narratives or the problem of environmental justice very quickly came entangled with previous debates on justice and previous critique. And I think that maybe for, you know, Northern colleagues or Northern networks, the way that we in Latin America approach immediately these discourses as discourses that, you know, actually are green ideologies, and that actually are just another turn of the machine of colonialism. I think that that's clear very quickly. What I'm finding is a critical perspective on all this environmental justice movement concepts. So I would agree also with my colleagues that the concept of planetary justice that is being built as in these places, it has it has potential, but has not really appeared in Latin America as, and it would be immediately problematized. I think immediately problematized because of the scale, because where it comes from, and because it usually all those concepts, as I said before, just come within networks that have the resources to do that. I also say that the planetary justice idea, or the whole environmental or climatic justice narratives, discourses, or frames, if we want to put it like that, uh, have to face the problem of actors. I think our colleagues here have mentioned various diverse actors, and perhaps because of the presentations were really short, we may had this idea of, you know, uh, homogeneity of, you know, and I think that what we can see is a very diverse set of actors linked with one another and with outside connections in a very different ways. As I think Celia says, in this case, the relationship between academia and the lay actors or grassroots actors is quite important, because it can bridge, you know, people that are very are situated in very different parts of the world or in different parts of the social matrix of positions. And I think that mediation role of the academia is still very important. And if any planetary idea of justice will be developed within, it is being developed within academia, and probably its persistence has to do with how the social movements incorporated and how this concept helps to make claims. That's a problem. Making claims, I think that's the important thing of the justice narrative. If it's going to work for that, something is for the communities and for the people to make claims to someone else. If it doesn't help to make claims, it won't work. That's what I think, and I think that's what my colleagues have mainly say. I believe another thing, and probably I'm going to close with it. I don't know if how tight we are with time, but the state was around all the discussions, and I think that my colleagues didn't really touch it very well, but we talk about the state and the law. So, and as I think it was Sofia or Gustavo or Gretel was saying, well, justice notions have to do contextualize within a political economy, but also within political traditions and the way the state in Latin America, its particularities, in contrast with the North or with Africa, for instance, or other regions in the world. I think the state has had a very strong role in Latin America in declaring. There's this sociologist, Martuchelli, who said that the state in Latin America is indicative. That's the indicative power of the state. And I think that the state is indicative, but has a very little strength or power to really encourage or bring together the whole country for justice or ecological plans. So we find a very broken political arena in that thing. There's something I find missing in what all my colleagues are, and in general in Latin America. I think there's a completely lack of perspective about well, not completely lack, but there's a few attention to the cities and the urban things. There's a lot of, in Mexico, at least 75% of the population now lives in cities. So when we talk about communities and rural communities and peasants, we should know that we're talking about, a small proportion of the population that has a lot of connection with the environment because of the tenure of land. But at the same time, I always wonder what is happening with the people within the cities, with the poverty in the cities, with the environmental problems within the cities. And I think that is a field that is very separated in the Latin America reflection. And we see a lot of people talking for communities and talking about communities and sometimes this is this displacement, in Latin America. And this is not new. This is something that has been happening since the 70s when people talk about the peasants and talk for the peasants and defend the peasants, but we never heard the peasants. And we are risking the same, I think, now with the ecological. So, and I want to connect this with the city thing, because these people living in the city talking about people that do not live in the city. And that's a tension that I think is very difficult to resolve sometimes. And I think that we are done. I think we should have another one and perhaps more free in time. En fin. So I don't know if someone of the organizers want to add something to my little short, very complex wrapping up of the session, or
no, it was great. I just I think on behalf of all of us, I will just say it has been wonderful, very insightful, very interesting to hear all of you, and we are grateful for your time, of course, and the space to come here. And to the audience, you have been amazing in posting a lot of questions and comments and sharing knowledge. And as Dimitris mentioned in the chat, it's part of our objectives to have these webinars, also to create a network and take these conversations beyond this space and also to continue. Final word. There have been some comments on Africa, and we are very happy that there were these comments, because we plan to do one of our webinars focusing on Africa, and we would appreciate also suggestions for speakers. And please send us your suggestions, and we will be happy, to follow up. So thanks again, and to be continued, of course, and see you at the next webinar or in another venue.
Thank you all so much.
Everybody.
Thank you
all of you.
Thank you, Ignacio. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Sofia, great to see you again. Joanna, abrazo.
So,
Thank you very much.
salud.
Bye.
Bye.